That $50,000 sitting in your savings account is not the safety net you think it is. It is a slow leak. And in 2026, the leak is getting faster. I am going to ask you to do something uncomfortable for the next 20 minutes. I am going to ask you to sit down and look at the actual math on the cash you have been so careful to protect. Not the math the bank shows you. Not the math your parents taught you. The real math. After taxes. After inflation. After the slow drift of what that $50,000 can actually buy compared to what it could buy this time last year. And I want to warn you now. The number you are about to see is not catastrophic. This is not a crash. This is not a panic video. This is something far more uncomfortable than a panic, because a panic at least gets your attention. What is happening to your savings account in 2026 is happening very, very quietly, in a place you almost never look, with consequences that compound for decades before anyone bothers to tell you. Let me show you what I mean. I am Jenna, and on this channel we do the math that the financial industry would rather you skip past. Today we are doing it on the most beloved, most comforting, most universally praised financial decision a middle-class American can make. Keeping a large cushion of cash in a high-yield savings account. And by the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly why that cushion is quietly costing you money even when the number on the screen keeps going up. But first I have to tell you what the data actually says, because the loudest version of this story is wrong, and the quiet version of this story is somehow worse. You may have seen videos this year claiming that prices are rising by double digits across the board and the dollar is collapsing. That is not what the data says. The headline Consumer Price Index from the Bureau of Labor Statistics as of April 2026, the most recent confirmed reading, came in at 3.8% year-over-year. That is the highest annual reading in nearly 3 years. It is significantly higher than the 2.6% average we lived with through 2025. But it is not 9%. It is not double-digit. It is something more insidious than that. It is just high enough to silently outrun a 4% savings account, while not so high that you ever quite feel the bleed in any single month. Now here is the catch. The headline number averages everything. And the things you actually spend money on every week have not behaved like the average. Energy prices in the April reading were up 17.9% over the previous 12 months. Gasoline alone was up 28.4%. Food at home is rising at its fastest monthly pace since 2022. Shelter, your rent, your mortgage if you have one, your property taxes if you own, is still climbing. Those are real, double-digit pockets of inflation, hiding inside a headline that politely averages itself into the threes. So when you fill up your tank and feel something is off, you are not imagining it. When you look at your grocery receipt and quietly wonder if the store mispriced something, you are not crazy. The headline is calm. The lived experience is not. That gap between the calm headline and the loud lived experience is exactly where your savings account is bleeding. Let me put real numbers on it. You have $50,000 sitting in a high-yield savings account. Maybe Marcus, maybe SoFi, maybe Ally, maybe Wealthfront. In mid-2026, the best rates from those banks are paying somewhere between 3.8% and 4.1%. We will call it 4% flat to make the math clean. 4% on $50,000 is $2,000 of gross interest over 12 months. That is the number the bank wants you to see. That is the number on the homepage. Now subtract the IRS. Interest from a savings account is taxed as ordinary income, the same rate as your paycheck. If you are in the 22% federal bracket, you owe 22 cents on every dollar of interest. If you are in the 24, it is 24. Add state income tax if your state collects it. For a typical middle-income earner in a state that taxes interest, the combined effective bite lands around 25%. 25% of $2,000 is $500. So your real after-tax interest is $1,500, not $2,000. Now subtract inflation. If your $50,000 earns $2,000 in gross interest, your balance grows to $52,000. But during the same 12 months, prices across the basket of things you buy went up by 3.8%. which means the $50,000 you started with would now require $51,900 just to buy the same stuff it bought last year. Not because the cash shrank in the account, because the cash got weaker outside the account. Stack the two together. $1,500 in real after-tax interest against $1,900 in lost purchasing power. The arithmetic is not friendly. On a $50,000 cushion sitting in one of the best high-yield savings accounts in America in 2026, the typical middle-class earner is roughly breaking even in real terms. And anyone in a higher bracket, or anyone unlucky enough to spend heavily on the double-digit categories like gasoline and food, is actively underwater. I want you to sit with that for a second. You did the responsible thing. You skipped vacations. You took the second job. You said no to a bigger apartment. You built a cushion. You parked it in the smartest-looking account you could find. The number on the homepage tells you are earning 4%. The IRS quietly takes a quarter. Inflation quietly takes the rest. And the cushion you fought so hard to build is, in the most generous reading of the math, treading water. In the less generous reading, it is sinking. Slowly. By percentages so small you would never notice them in any individual month. But the year-over-year drift, compounded across a working life, is exactly the gap between the middle class and the people one rung above the middle class. That gap is not built by income. It is built by what people do with their savings while they are not paying attention. Now here is the part where I have to be honest with you, because pretending otherwise would be lazy. A 4% high-yield savings account is genuinely better than a 0.4% traditional bank account. If you have been parking your emergency fund at the same big-box bank your parents used, the kind with branches and free pens and a teller who calls you by your first name, that account is paying you almost nothing. The national average for a regular savings account in 2026 sits somewhere around 0.5%. Moving from that to a Marcus or a SoFi or a Wealthfront is one of the easiest wealth wins in personal finance. So I am not telling you that high-yield savings accounts are bad. They are not. For the specific job they are designed for, they are excellent. The problem is not the account. The problem is the role you have assigned to it. A high-yield savings account is built to protect money that has a known use date in the near future. The plumbing emergency. The car repair. The job loss buffer. The down payment you are closing on next August. Money that cannot afford to lose 15% in a stock market correction the week before you need it. For that specific job, a 4% insured account is one of the best instruments ever invented. But that is not what most $50,000 savings account balances are for. Most of them are not earmarked for a specific bill in the next 12 months. Most of them are sitting there because the number looks impressive. Because the alternative, investing in the stock market, feels like handing your money to something unpredictable. Because the savings account feels grown up and the brokerage account feels risky. That feeling is not a financial distinction. It is an emotional one. And in 2026, it is one of the most expensive emotions a woman can have about her money. Let me show you what that emotional decision actually costs over time, because the 1-year math is uncomfortable, but the 30-year math is brutal. Take $20,000. Not 50. Just 20. Park it in a 4% savings account and roll it forward for 30 years. After 3 decades, it grows to about $65,000. Now take the same $20,000 and put it instead in a diversified low-cost index fund earning the S&P 500's long-run historical average of around 10%. After the same 30 years, it grows to about $349,000. The same money, the same starting amount, the same 30 years. The savings account ends at $65,000. The index fund ends at $349,000. The gap, just under $284,000, was built entirely on the difference between parking your money in a place that felt safe and putting it to work in a place that felt uncertain. That number is supposed to land uncomfortably. It is supposed to make you think about the other amounts of money sitting in savings accounts across your own life. The emergency fund that quietly grew past 6 months of expenses years ago. The down payment money that has been accumulating for 3 years while you wait for the right house. The cash you are holding because the market makes you nervous and at least the savings account feels solid. And before you cash everything out and convince yourself the savings account was a scam, please stop. Because that is not the lesson. Overcorrecting is just as expensive as missing the point. Here is the lesson. The high-yield savings account is the right tool for one specific, time-limited job. It is the wrong tool for everything else. The trap is not the account. The trap is letting an account designed to protect 3 months of emergency expenses quietly inherit 30 years of long-term capital, simply because the number looks impressive on a screen. So let me give you the playbook, because this video is useless if it ends in a feeling instead of a plan. First, calculate your actual emergency fund target. 3 to 6 months of real living expenses. Not what your salary is. What your monthly survival budget is. Rent or mortgage, utilities, groceries, insurance, the bare minimum to live for 90 to 180 days if your income disappeared tomorrow. That is the number. Anything in your savings account above that number is not emergency money. It is something else. And what it is exactly is what we are about to figure out. Second, separate that excess cash by time horizon. Be honest with yourself. Money you genuinely need within 12 months stays in the high-yield savings account. Money you might need within 1 to 5 years can probably go into shorter-term treasury bills or a brokered CD ladder, which in 2026 are paying similar yields to HYSAs with slightly better tax treatment if you live in a state that taxes interest, because treasuries are state tax exempt. Money you do not need for more than 5 years, the long horizon money, the retirement money, the future house money you might delay another decade, that money is paying you the highest price every single year it sits in a cash account. That money is the money the savings account is silently taxing. Third, and this is the one that requires the most uncomfortable mental shift. The number in your savings account is not a measure of your financial security. It is a measure of one specific thing, which is your near-term liquidity buffer. Past a certain threshold, every additional dollar in that account is not making you safer. It is making you slower. The cushion that felt protective is the cushion that is keeping you from opening the brokerage account, from maxing the Roth, from taking your employer match, from doing the harder, less immediately satisfying work of putting your money where the next 30 years actually live. Security and trajectory are not the same thing. One tells you where you stand today. The other determines where you end up. 2 households with nearly identical incomes across a 20-year span can end up in radically different financial positions, based almost entirely on how much of their accumulated savings they put to work in assets that grow with the underlying economy, versus how much they kept in low real return accounts, waiting for a certainty about the market that was never going to fully arrive. Pew Research and the Urban Institute have both shown this in detail. The wealth gap inside the middle class is not driven primarily by income differences. It is driven by what people do with their savings year after year while no one is watching. So here is what 1.5 years of inflation drag and 4% yields actually taught me, sitting at my own kitchen table in 2026. The headline rate on a high-yield savings account is the start of the math, not the end. For a typical middle-income earner in a state that taxes interest, the real after-tax, after-inflation return on a 4% HYSA in 2026 is somewhere between break-even and slightly negative. That is not a crash. It is a slow leak. And a slow leak across 30 years of working life is more expensive than almost any other quiet decision you will make with your money. The emergency fund rule exists for a reason. 3 to 6 months of actual living expenses. That is the target. Money above that threshold has a different job, and it deserves a different home. The 4% yield that felt like a permanent gift from the Federal Reserve in 2023 is not permanent. It has already drifted down since the late 2024 rate cuts. The rate has no floor. It is whatever a bank decides to offer on a web page tomorrow morning, shaped almost entirely by whatever the Federal Reserve decides at its next meeting. There is no business growing underneath that rate. There is no asset compounding. There is just a number on a screen, and that number can be lower next quarter without warning or apology. And the final thing, which is the hardest one to actually hold on to, is this. The feeling of financial safety and the reality of financial progress are not the same thing. They often feel identical. They rarely are. A large balance in a savings account produces a particular kind of comfort. Comfort is worth something. But it is not worth $284,000 over 30 years. It is not worth the silent, slow tax of inflation in 2026. It is not worth the years of compounding you trade away in exchange for the calm of seeing a 5-digit balance every time you open the banking app. The most comfortable financial decision is rarely the most powerful one. And the question worth asking about your money in 2026 is not whether it feels safe. It is whether it is working as hard as the next 30 years are going to ask it to. Look at the actual number in your savings account tonight. The one above your emergency fund. Ask it what job it is doing. Not what job you assigned it years ago. What job it is actually doing right now, every quiet day while you sleep. If the honest answer is that it is sitting there because it feels good to see a big number, that is the most expensive feeling you are paying for in 2026. I am Jenna. I will see you in the next one.